if you want to beat like $1, $2 at the casino and play like $10 tournaments online, what would you say to somebody who's trying to get involved now? Because it is a lot different than it used to be.
I mean, ultimately, still, it's like your base has to come from just experience, where it's like, okay, you have to just put in a lot of volume, whether it be like, okay, you're going to start at play money and you're going to play a lot of volume at play money, or you're going to play dollar tournaments or 1 cent, 2 cent, or 2 cent, 5 cent cash games. Because you still have to have like a base that makes your game somewhat fluid versus like, oh, I saw on the solver, like it tells you you should kind of play something this way, or like, oh, I watched this training video where they give you a strategy. Because the problem is, if you don't have, at some point, it's like you still have to, especially if you're trying to beat smaller games, you really just need to be able to hand read, and you need to be able to kind of just like put players into different categories where it's like, oh, this type of player way under bluffs in this spot, so I should fold way more than like I'm supposed to, you know? So so for small games, I don't think like solvers or anything like that are needed in order to beat them. But yeah, it's like just putting in volume and then watching some training videos, which has really been the recipe to getting better at non-high stakes for a long time. That is still going to be the way to go.
From there, though, what was at what point would you say to like go to the next level? Was there something that happened? I see in 2012 this 100K you take down for 1.3 million. Was that another like milestone, or at that point were you already playing a lot of 100Ks or was this like I mean, this is $1 million score though?
Yeah, that was a milestone. I mean, really there was this 5-year period in Vegas where the tournaments were just unbelievable in terms of the quality of like the high roller scene and whatnot. So I'd say the big turning point was when the Aria high rollers first came about. Like, it was something where it was almost all Vegas players or like American players, and the ratio between professional players and recreationals was ridiculous, where it might have been a 50-50 split or something like that. That would be completely unheard of nowadays.
Yeah.
So really, I'd say that's probably when I was able to take it to the next level, just because like, hey, look at these tournaments. They're running 15 times a year. Like there's 30 or 40 high rollers a year in Vegas, and the fields are all completely amazing. And most people don't know about them yet. So this was like pre-Poker Go and the Poker Go studio. So that was really a fortunate time for me, where it was just like a right place, right time thing, where it's like, hey, Carrie comes to everybody. He's like, hey, we're going to start tournaments. We're going to do 2 25Ks and a 50K, or a 25K, a 50K, and a 100K. And I mean, the fields were just unbelievable looking back. And I was lucky in that I was able to capitalize extremely well during that 3 or 4 year stretch.
Tom, you ship it 827K, sort of puts you in a new stratosphere. But tell me, what were you doing at this stage to kind of already be a dominant player? You know, were you studying? Were you doing card runners? What was sort of your way of processing information and separating yourself early on as one of the elites?
Yeah, I mean, back then it was much more, you have a certain friends who you just like talk poker with, where it's like, hey, I tried this thing out. Like, oh, I tried this out. This worked really well. And kind of just running different strategies by people. Because you figure back then there were no solvers. There was card runners was just coming around, where it's like, oh, here's some tips for how you can play better. So the game was way different back then. It was much more, it's like, hey, I'm here with, it's like, here's my group of 5 friends. Like, we're constantly send hands constantly, and that's how. So I thought we had some strategies that at the time that were ahead of their time, with like small C betting and things like that. And then also just exploitive strategies in terms of how much you could get away with like really small 3 bets and 4 bets, because people would play a shove or fold strategy against it. So yeah, but it was much more, in some ways, was like more pure back then, in that, or I wouldn't even say more pure, because that a weak way to view things, but more so the game was just different back then. It's like the skill set that was needed was a lot.
What about this 5K, the party poker one? Obviously COVID happened, so this was the last one actually, right? This was 2019. They didn't have it this summer. This is a pretty tough lineup down the stretch here. A lot of names, familiar names, really world-class players. What kind of worked for you in this? Did you have all the chips? I think we actually played in this for 100 days briefly. What was kind of like working for you in this tournament in particular?
Yeah, I mean, stack going into the final couple tables, and I know I won 2 flips where one time I had ace jack versus sevens, and the other time I had sevens versus ace jack, and I won both of them. And then at the final table, I had a big chip lead, but then I remember Moneymaker was second or third in chips,
Mm.
and I raised, and he 3-bet me from the small blind or something like that, and I pocket eights, and the flop came down something like 7-5-2, and he bet and I called, and I turned an 8, and I mean kings, so I kinda just, like, coolered him for all the chips. So then at that point, it might have been I don't know when he went out, if he went out or something like that, but at that, I might have had 70% of the chips with 5 left or that, like a ridiculous thing, so cruise from there. So one of those just, like, dream stretches where your bluffs work, you win your all-ins pre-flop, you get there when you're behind, like, all that stuff, and, I mean, hey, that's what it takes to win a 500-person tournament, no matter how good you are compared to the field, and, I mean, at that point, I mean, I might have been one of the better players, but I certainly wasn't anywhere near the best player in the field.
I just think this, just by the nature of volume and doing it, something would happen. And I mean, it's got to be a little nerve wracking to ship off like a high value card or something. I guess you put security on it or do some extra stuff. But have you had any experiences with that, with any problems?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, early on when I took over this business, we would send in cards for customers, and we sent in a package for customers that had probably about $10,000 in cards with inside of it, with some of it being the stores and some of it being customers. And yeah, the package just disappeared and was lost. And at the time, it was an oversight by us. We didn't insure the package. So yeah, we just ended up having to eat the loss. So that is kind of a scary part. You send out these collectibles and you're looking at a 3x5 inch or whatever the size is, 3x4 inch piece of paper that might be worth thousands of dollars. And it's like, yeah, this is something that's easy to steal and is fairly liquid. So it's definitely always a worry. And it's always smart to just make sure to insure your packages and try to send in the safest way possible.
And,
And then as far as COVID and the impact on sports cards, really what happened there was, one, so many of the printing facilities were shut down for an extended period of time.
mm-hmm.
So there was all this demand, but there were no new cards being printed. So then the existing supply of like boxes and singles and packs just gets bought up. And it's once again supply and demand, and it drives the prices up. And the other thing you look at is during COVID, it's like all this money that would normally be spent on other things, where it be spent on like travel or dining out or sports betting, like all this stuff, like people weren't able to spend on those things. So instead, a lot of that money flowed into sports cards, and it actually helped the market quite a bit, because
That's really
it is entertainment. It's like if you look, you could go in online and you could have somebody open a box for you, or you could be in a chat room where everybody gets a card or two from a box, and there's kind of a sense of like community there. So it's like when everybody was stuck at home, it actually, yeah, it just really drove the prices upward.
What do you believe are the biggest problems? Because this, I know there was some in the 90s, early 2000s. There was a counterfeiter, maybe famously or infamous, someone that did
Yeah.
something, really made a lot of counterfeits, and this put a really bad, it left a bad stigma in the industry. Nowadays I look at it like casino chips. There's going to be like ways to be more secure, but it's always a cat and mouse, right? Just like anything. There's counterfeits. There's, now there's computer printing. So what do you think are some of the biggest obstacles in engaging this? And what do you think a solution would be moving forward to make stuff that people know they're getting the real thing?
Really, I mean, that's part of the reason why grading has turned into such a thing. For people who like don't know that much about cards, grading is like you send the card into a company and they check the authenticity of the card, and then they give it a grade on a 1 to 10 scale off of the condition of the card. So I think it's just, yeah, there's still a big issue with counterfeits and also altering of cards, where it's like, hey, this card has a bad corner, so somebody will try to cut off a small piece of the corner, so the corner is sharp, so it appears to be in better condition. So really, I think what we're going to be looking at in the future is computerized grading, where it's just like very accurate, where the grade that's assigned, instead of being by like a human, where there's going to be some variation and some errors and like cards missed, I think you're going to be looking at computerized grading, where it's like the card is measured very precisely and graded very precisely. So that way people will know that they're getting the real thing.
Very interesting. And is this something you've had? Do you see this Like when people bring cards into you, or do you notice, do you feel like there's a fair amount of this going on where there's sort of stuff that isn't right, or is it really cleaned up a lot in your opinion recently?
With cards, it's actually not that bad. Let's say for people to be most careful is with memorabilia, because unfortunately we do see so many people come in on a week-to-week basis where it's like, oh, here I have this signed Tom Brady base or football, or I have like here's a Mickey Mantle signed ball, and the problem is that so much memorabilia is faked, where the signatures are faked, and there's so many companies out there that are providing certificates of authenticity that don't really. So I just say specifically with memorabilia, you want to be very careful and like who you buy from, and you want to make sure that's been authenticated by a major company, where there's only really 3 or 4 companies that I would trust.